November 1942. The Tunisian desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky bleached white by the midday sun, heat shimmering off sand and rock in liquid waves that bent light and distorted distance. The air tasted of dust, cordite residue from the morning skirmish, and the acrid smell of overheated metal. Oberst Heinrich Müller stood in the commander's cupola of his Panzer IV, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the wadis and ridgelines ahead. His intelligence briefing had been clear. American forces were still consolidating their beachhead at Casablanca, hundreds of kilometers to the west. Their armored units were known to be equipped with obsolete M3 Lee tanks, monstrosities with riveted armor and sponson-mounted guns that belonged in museums, not in modern battlefields. The Americans had no combat experience, no desert warfare doctrine, no understanding of mobile armored operations. They would require weeks to organize supply lines, establish forward positions, and coordinate with British forces. Weeks that would give the Africa Corps time to fortify positions, plan counterattacks, and prepare to throw the inexperienced invaders back into the sea. But Müller had not accounted for what was moving toward him through the desert at 60 kilometers per hour, raising plumes of dust visible for 30 kilometers in every direction. He had not anticipated the revolution in American logistics doctrine that treated distance as an inconvenience rather than an obstacle, that transformed supply chains into competitive advantages, that measured operational tempo not in cautious kilometers per day, but in aggressive 100-kilometer advances. He expected to face American armor when German intelligence predicted, in 3 weeks, perhaps 4, after proper reconnaissance, supply accumulation, and careful planning. He did not expect to see enemy silhouettes crusting the ridgeline directly ahead of him right now, at noon on November 18th, exactly 72 hours after intelligence had confidently assured him no American armor could possibly be within 200 kilometers of his position. German armor doctrine in 1942 had been forged through 3 years of continental warfare, where logistics followed predictable European patterns. Railways moved bulk supplies to forward depots. Trucks carried ammunition and fuel to tactical positions over maintained roads. Armies advanced at speeds determined by infantry march rates and supply line elasticity. The German staff planning system, perfected through decades of Prussian military education, calculated advance rates with mathematical precision. Account for fuel consumption, ammunition expenditure, mechanical breakdown rates, terrain obstacles, and enemy resistance. An armored division could advance perhaps 40 kilometers per day under favorable conditions, 20 under combat conditions, and required regular pauses to allow supply echelons to catch up. This rhythm had worked in Poland, France, Yugoslavia, and the opening phases of the Russian campaign. It was scientific, predictable, rational. The Americans Müller faced operated under entirely different assumptions born not from military tradition, but from industrial logistics and corporate efficiency studies. American staff officers had studied not just Clausewitz and von Moltke, but Henry Ford and Frederick Taylor. They viewed warfare through the lens of industrial management: identify bottlenecks, eliminate inefficiencies, maximize throughput, compress timelines. The U.S. Army's Transportation Corps approached logistics with the same mindset that moved refrigerated beef from Chicago stockyards to New York restaurants in 36 hours. Distance was simply a variable to be minimized through superior organization, not a fundamental constraint. When the M10 tank destroyer battalions landed in North Africa in early November, their movement orders reflected this philosophy. Minimal pause for consolidation, maximum speed to forward positions, accept risks that cautious doctrine would reject.
The M10 Wolverine itself embodied American pragmatism over perfectionism, while German engineers labored to create purpose-built tank hunters with optimal armor-gun mobility balance. American designers took a different approach. Mount the largest practical gun on the most available chassis, prioritize production speed over design refinement, accept compromises in protection to maximize offensive capability. The M10 mated a 3-inch M7 gun capable of penetrating 80 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters to a modified M4 Sherman chassis. Its armor was thin, barely 50 millimeters at maximum thickness. Its open-top turret vulnerable to artillery fragments in small arms. German technical intelligence officers who reviewed captured plans dismissed it as inadequate, underprotected, a design that sacrificed crew survivability for marginal increases in firepower. They calculated that in direct combat, a well-positioned Panzer IV would destroy an M10 before the American vehicle could effectively engage. But the Germans had calculated for the wrong battle. The M10 was never designed for static defensive combat or cautious advance and consolidate operations. It was designed for the American way of war. Rapid exploitation, aggressive maneuver, appear where unexpected, strike and displace before the enemy could organize a response. Its relatively lightweight, 30 tons versus the Panzer Force 25, gave it ground pressure advantages in soft sand. Its right radial engine, borrowed from aircraft production lines, delivered reliable horsepower that kept vehicles moving when careful maintenance wasn't possible. Its open turret, which German analysts considered a fatal vulnerability, provided excellent crew visibility and rapid target acquisition. Most critically, its gun could kill any German tank in North Africa from ranges where return fire was ineffective. The M10 wasn't built to win tank duels through superior protection. It was built to arrive where it wasn't supposed to be and destroy enemy armor before the enemy realized they were under threat. The American advance toward Mueller's position illustrated logistics as operational weapon. When M10 battalions disembarked at Casablanca, they carried 3 days of fuel and ammunition, standard combat loads that German planners would consider barely adequate for defensive operations. But behind them can the industrial might of American logistics. Liberty ships unloading 2,000 tons of supplies per day. Port battalions working 3 shifts to clear bottlenecks. Truck companies operating continuous relay systems that kept supplies moving 24 hours daily. American quartermasters had pre-positioned fuel dumps along projected advance routes before the armor even landed. Engineer battalions cleared and improved desert tracks using earth-moving equipment that matched or exceeded what American civilian construction companies deployed for peacetime projects. The result was an advance that sustained itself through momentum. Armor pushed forward at maximum speed, while supply echelons built the infrastructure to support them on the move, rather than waiting for infrastructure to be perfect before advancing. German reconnaissance first detected the American column at dawn on November 17th, 120 kilometers west of Mueller's position. The report seemed implausible. Battalion-strength armored force moving east at sustained high speed, minimal security halts, advancing through terrain that German staff planning had assessed as requiring 2 days to traverse carefully. Mueller's divisional intelligence officer initially dismissed it as exaggeration. Perhaps a company-strength raiding force, possibly reconnaissance elements, certainly not a main force advance. By midday, reconnaissance aircraft confirmed the impossible. At least 40 tracked vehicles, organized in tactical formation, advancing directly toward German forward positions with aggressive confidence. By evening, they had covered another 60 kilometers. By midnight, German listening posts reported engine sounds 10 kilometers away. And now, at noon on the 18th, they were here.
The engagement lasted 11 minutes. The M10s crested the ridgeline in dispersed formation, commanders already identifying targets through binoculars, gunners tracking Panzer IVs that had been stationary for hours in defensive positions. The Americans had tactical surprise despite moving dozens of vehicles across open desert. They had simply arrived too fast for German doctrine to process. Mueller's company was positioned for an engagement they expected to fight next week, possibly next month. Ammunition was properly stored but not immediately accessible. Crews were at appropriate readiness for a static position, not maximum alert for immediate contact. The defensive positions were well sighted for the threat axis intelligence had predicted, but the Americans were attacking from 30 degrees off that axis, exploiting the gap between 2 German positions because their maps were more current and their reconnaissance more aggressive. The 3-inch guns fired first. At 1,200 meters, their armor-piercing rounds struck with devastating effect. The first Panzer IV exploded immediately, ammunition cooking off in a tower of flame that rose 30 meters. The second took a hit to the turret ring that jammed the traverse and killed the gunner. The third managed to fire 1 round, which struck an M10's glasses plate and ricocheted harmlessly skyward, before taking 3 hits in rapid succession from different M10s that had coordinated their fire instinctively. Mueller's tank backed desperately into a hull-down position behind a rock outcropping, but the Americans were already moving, 3 vehicles maneuvering to flank positions while 4 more maintained suppressing fire. Within 5 minutes, 6 Panzer IVs were burning. Within 10, the survivors were retreating, trailing smoke and leaking oil, their carefully prepared defensive position abandoned. The after-action reports Mueller filed that evening reflected shock more than tactical analysis. American armor had appeared 160 kilometers ahead of where intelligence placed them. They had sustained an advance rate of more than 70 kilometers per day across desert terrain, under combat conditions, maintaining combat effectiveness on arrival. They had attacked immediately upon contact without the careful reconnaissance and artillery preparation German doctrine required. They had demonstrated gunnery skills that suggested extensive training in fire control systems superior to intelligence estimates. Most disturbing, they had withdrawn after the engagement not because they were forced to, but because they had achieved their objective. This wasn't desperate combat. This was a planned operation executed exactly as intended. The Americans weren't learning how to fight in the desert. They had arrived knowing. German tactical intelligence spent the following weeks trying to understand what they had encountered. Interrogation of captured American prisoners revealed the scale of the logistical effort. Supply dumps established during the advance, not before it. Fuel trucks moving in parallel with combat elements rather than following behind. Maintenance teams equipped with standardized replacement parts that allowed field repairs in hours instead of days. The Americans had brought their industrial production mentality to warfare itself. While German units paused to consolidate, the Americans consolidated while moving. While German logistics planned for known requirements, American logistics oversupplied and accepted waste as cheaper than delay. While German doctrine treated rapid exploitation as a calculated risk, American doctrine treated speed itself as a weapon. Arrive before the enemy expects you, attack before they're ready, maintain pressure before they can recover. The M10's combat debut in Tunisia shattered German assumptions about American military competence. Officers who had dismissed American soldiers as soft, undisciplined, and doctrinally naive discovered they faced an enemy that had industrialized warfare itself. The tank destroyers that appeared miles ahead of schedule were not anomalies or lucky accidents. They represented systematic application of American strengths, vast industrial capacity, superior logistics infrastructure, pragmatic acceptance of good enough solutions over perfect designs, and operational tempo that treated distance as something to be conquered through organization rather than accepted as limiting. The crews manning those M10s weren't superior soldiers in individual skill, they were components of a system that multiplied individual capability through coordination, supply efficiency, and technological adequacy. By early 1943, as American forces pushed deeper into Tunisia in coordination with British advances from the east, German commanders faced the reality that their carefully calculated operational plans were obsolete before execution. The Americans they fought didn't advance at predictable rates. They appeared where logistics should have been impossible, attacked when consolidation should have been necessary, sustained operations when supplies should have been exhausted. The M10 tank destroyers became symbols of this new reality: adequate armor, sufficient firepower, and most devastatingly, always present before they were supposed to be. In the burned-out hulks of Panzer IV scattered across Tunisian wadis, and in the frantic radio reports of units reporting enemy contact days before intelligence said it was possible, lay the wreckage of German confidence in operational predictability. The Americans had transformed logistics from administrative necessity into strategic weapon, and no amount of tactical excellence or individual courage could compensate for an enemy who could simply appear anywhere, anytime, supplied and ready to fight, miles ahead of every careful calculation.